My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I read the notification on my phone. After 23 years, they were releasing him. I set my coffee mug down on the porch railing and watched the Arizona sun climb over the Rincon Mountains, the same view I'd looked at every morning for the past 15 years, and I thought about my son. About the morning he climbed into my bed with his little tablet pressed against his chest like he was protecting something fragile. About how a 6-year-old boy with dinosaur pajamas and a gap where his 2 front teeth used to be saved my life. He's 32 now. He called me last Sunday from his office in Chicago, where he works as a victim's advocate attorney. He says he doesn't remember most of that year. I'm grateful for that. I remember every second of it. It was a Wednesday in February, 26 years ago. I was 37 years old, living in a 4-bedroom colonial in a suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, and I believed I had a good marriage. My husband and I had been together 9 years, married for 7. Our son had just turned 6 in January. I worked part-time as a dental hygienist, 3 days a week, which I'd arranged specifically so I could be home when my son got off the school bus. We had a dog named Biscuit and a subscription to a meal kit service we never used, and a standing date night every other Friday. I thought the biggest problem in my life was that I couldn't lose the last 12 pounds I'd been trying to lose since my son was born. I was wrong about so many things. My husband was a regional manager for a logistics company, which meant he traveled Tuesday through Thursday. Most weeks, sometimes longer. He'd been doing it the entire time we were together, so I'd stopped noticing the rhythm of his absence years ago. The empty side of the bed on Wednesday mornings was just a fact of life, like the Ohio winters or the way Biscuit always knocked over his water bowl. That February morning, my son came into the kitchen while I was packing his lunch. He was still in his pajamas, which meant he'd woken up early, which he only did when something was bothering him. I remember looking at his face and knowing something was off before he said a single word. Children wear their feelings in their eyes in a way adults learn to hide. His eyes looked too old for his face. "Mom," he said, "I need to show you something on my tablet." I almost said, "Not right now, baby. I'm trying to get you ready for school." I almost said, "We can look after dinner." I almost said, "Whatever it is, it can wait." Instead, I put down the sandwich bag and sat at the kitchen table. "Okay," I said. "Show me." He held out the tablet. His hands were shaking too. I hadn't noticed that until years later, when he mentioned it in therapy. He told his therapist he'd been terrified I wouldn't believe him, that he'd been carrying what he knew for 3 weeks and hadn't known how to tell me. On the screen was a video. Shaky, slightly blurred, clearly recorded by a 6-year-old holding a tablet through a crack in a doorway. But the audio was clear enough. My husband's voice. And a woman's voice I didn't recognize. "The cabin's already paid through spring," my husband was saying. His voice was different on the recording. Flat, businesslike, nothing like the way he talked to me. "We just need to wait until the policy clears the 2-year mark." March 14th, the woman's voice. "And you're sure she won't suspect anything?" "She doesn't suspect anything. She never does." He paused. "I've been putting the drops in her vitamins for 2 months. Her doctor already has it on record that she's been having balance issues, dizzy spells. By the time it happens at the cabin, it'll look like she lost her footing on the trail." I watched my husband's shadow on the recording, moving across his home office wall. The woman laughed softly, and the sound of it turned my stomach. "What about our boy? He'll be with her parents. I'll say we need a weekend alone, that the marriage is struggling. Her mother's been asking us to visit anyway." My son had paused the video. He was watching my face. I sat very still for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. Biscuit scratched at the back door to come in. Outside, a school bus rumbled down the next street over. "When did you record this?" My voice came out steady. "I don't know how." 3 weeks ago," my son said. He was wringing the hem of his pajama shirt. "I woke up and heard Daddy on the phone and I thought maybe it was you. But your voice is different." He looked at his shoes. "I didn't know what drops meant. But I looked up policy on your computer and it said insurance, and I know insurance is about money when someone gets hurt." 6 years old. Reading the definition of an insurance policy on my laptop at midnight because his father was planning to kill me and something in my child's gut told him it was wrong. I pulled him into my arms and held him for a long time. He was trembling. I realized I was too. "Who else have you told?" I asked into his hair. "Nobody." He pulled back and looked at me very seriously. Daddy said if you ever told anybody his business, he would be very, very sad. He said it right after, like he was talking to me even though I was behind the door. My son's jaw tightened in a way no 6-year-old's jaw should ever tighten. I think he knew I was there. That was the moment I understood that my husband was not just dangerous. He was calculated. He had looked through a cracked door at his son hiding in the hallway and made sure the boy heard the warning. Counted on the fact that a child would protect his father's feelings before his mother's life. He hadn't counted on how much my son loved me. I kept my face calm. I nodded slowly, the way I did when he showed me a drawing he was proud of. Then I said, "Can you save that video somewhere safe on your tablet? Put a password on it?" He nodded. He already had. He'd created a folder he'd labeled Dinosaurs and put a 4-digit lock on it. I sent him upstairs to get dressed for school. And then I sat at my kitchen table and dismantled the last 9 years of my life in my mind, piece by piece. My balance issues, my dizzy spells. I'd been to my doctor twice in the past 2 months for exactly that. Fatigue, she'd said. Possible inner ear issue. We'd agreed to monitor it. I'd blamed stress. The Ohio winter. Not sleeping well. My husband had expressed such concern. Had started bringing me my morning vitamins with my coffee. Such a thoughtful gesture. I thought about the life insurance policy. I'd signed it without reading the fine print at the kitchen table 2 years ago. My husband had explained it casually as something his company's financial advisor had recommended. I'd trusted him completely. I always had. March 14th was 5 weeks away. I thought about the cabin. We'd rented it once, the previous fall, a remote property in the Hocking Hills area, about 90 minutes south of Columbus. Dense forest, steep sandstone trails along the gorge, a creek that ran fast and cold even in October. My husband had suggested we go back in the spring. The trails would be beautiful, he'd said. We'd bring my son's cousins, make a whole weekend of it. I'd thought it was a generous idea. The trails along the gorge dropped 50 feet in some places. Anyone with documented balance issues and dizzy spells had no business being near those edges. I drove my son to school that morning instead of putting him on the bus. In the car, I said to him, "What you did was incredibly brave. You're not in any trouble. But I need you to not say anything to Daddy yet, okay? I need a few days to figure out what to do. Can you do that for me?" He said yes. Then he said, "Mom, are we going to be okay?" I reached across the center console and squeezed his hand. "Yes," I told him. "I promise." I went home. I sat in the driveway for a moment. Then I called my older sister. She was in her car within 20 minutes. My sister had married a man who turned out to be, in her words, aggressively mediocre, and she'd divorced him at 32 and never looked back. She had zero patience for dishonest men and an almost supernatural ability to keep a cool head in a crisis. She listened to the recording on my son's tablet without blinking. She listened to me describe the vitamins, the dizzy spells, the cabin, the policy, the date. Then she said, "Do you know a good attorney?" I said I knew a decent estate lawyer. She said, "That's not what I mean." She made 2 calls. The first was to a woman she'd worked with years ago who had since become a detective with the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. The second was to a private investigator she'd found through a colleague, a former state trooper named Gerald, who had apparently seen everything. They came to my house that afternoon while my son was at school. I showed them the recording. I told them everything I knew and everything I suspected. Gerald took notes without looking up. Detective Reyes asked calm, precise questions. At the end of 2 hours, she said, "We need to verify the second person in that recording. And we need to find out who she is." Gerald found out in 48 hours. Her name was Diane. She was 34 years old, lived in Louisville, Kentucky, and had 2 children from a previous marriage, ages 8 and 10. She and my husband had been together for 4 years. She believed they were planning to get married as soon as his current situation resolved itself. He had told her he was unhappily married to a woman who refused to consider divorce on religious grounds. She didn't know he had a son. He had told her, "We were childless." The life insurance policy on me was for $2.5 million. It had been taken out 22 months earlier. March 14th would mark the 2-year anniversary, the standard period after which most policies cannot contest a payout for suspicious circumstances. Gerald also found, In a storage unit my husband rented under his mother's maiden name, documentation of a bank account in the Cayman Islands. 18 months of deposits. He'd been planning this for a long time. I didn't sleep for 3 days. I went through the motions: school, drop-off, work, dinner, homework, bedtime, and inside I was somewhere else entirely. My husband came home Thursday evening as usual, kissed me on the cheek, ruffled my son's hair, sat at the dinner table, and asked about our days. I watched him the way you watch something you finally identified correctly. A snake you'd been calling a garden hose. That night, after my son was in bed, my husband brought me my vitamins with a glass of water. He stood in the doorway of the bedroom with that familiar, easy smile. "You should take those before you forget," he said. "I know," I said. "I will." I waited until I heard the shower running. Then I emptied the capsule into a tissue and flushed it. I had been doing that for 2 weeks by then, since the morning after I heard the recording. I still didn't know exactly what he'd been giving me, but my dizzy spells had already improved considerably. Detective Reyes called me the following Monday. She said they had enough to proceed, but the recording, while compelling, had been made by a child in a private residence. The chain of evidence was complicated. They needed a confession on record. They needed him to believe the plan was still on track. She asked me if I was willing to go to the cabin. I thought about my son's face at the kitchen table, his small hands shaking, his eyes too old for his age. I thought about the way he'd said, "Are we going to be okay?" with the steady voice of someone who had been terrified for 3 weeks and was trying very hard not to show it. I said yes. The next 3 weeks were the longest of my life. I had to be a wife. I had to be believable. I had to make my husband think I was still dizzy, still foggy, still completely unaware. He suggested the cabin weekend over dinner one Tuesday, casual as suggesting a movie. "I think we need some time, just the two of us," he said. "I've been feeling disconnected lately. The Hocking Hills cabin is available the 15th through the 17th. "That sounds wonderful," I said. I smiled at my plate. My son looked up at me from across the table. I gave him the smallest nod. He looked back down at his food without a word. We arranged for my son to stay with my parents in Dayton for the weekend. The morning I dropped him off, he held on longer than usual when I hugged him. He pressed his face into my shoulder the way he used to when he was a toddler. "Come back, Mom," he said. His voice was muffled in my jacket. "Every single day," I told him. "Always." My parents waved from the porch. They thought we were having a marriage retreat. I waved back and got in the car and drove to meet Detective Reyes. She and 3 officers had been at the cabin since the previous day. They'd placed audio-activated recording equipment in the main room and on the rear porch that faced the gorge trail. A state park officer was positioned further up the trail system. Gerald had driven past the cabin property twice to confirm no unexpected variables. Detective Reyes fitted me with a recording device small enough to sit flat beneath the left cup of my bra. She showed me how to activate it with a single press through my shirt. "If at any point you feel your safety is genuinely compromised before we can intervene," she said, "you do not have to continue. We can bring him in on what we already have." "I know," I said, but I also knew what she hadn't said. What they already had was strong but not airtight. A recording made by a child through a cracked door. Circumstantial financial evidence. No direct statement from my husband on record. If his attorney was good enough, and he would hire the best one available, there was risk. I needed him to say it himself, clearly, irreversibly. My husband was charming the entire drive south. He'd brought good coffee in a thermos. He played music I liked. He asked about my week, complained mildly about his regional director, told a funny story about a rental truck driver he'd spoken with. He held my hand on the center console when the road straightened out. I kept my breathing even. I answered in all the right places. I laughed at the right moments. "You seem tired," he said somewhere around Lancaster. "Still those dizzy spells," I said. "I think the trail air will help." He nodded thoughtfully. "We should take it slow on the trails," he said. "I don't want you overdoing it." I looked out the passenger window at the bare February trees and thought, there it is. The cabin was beautiful in a cold, austere way. The gorge trail began 40 feet from the back porch, descending through sandstone and cedar into a creek bed 50 feet below. In October, it had been stunning. In February, with ice still edging the rock formations and the trail slick in the shadows, it was something else. We settled in, unpacked groceries, built a fire. My husband was attentive, warm, present in a way he hadn't been in months, maybe years. He cooked dinner. He opened a bottle of wine I hadn't seen him pack. "A special occasion," he said, pouring my glass first. I watched him pour his own. I sipped mine once, just enough to wet my lips, and set it down. He didn't push it, which told me he'd already accounted for another method. That night, he made chamomile tea before bed. "My favorite," he said, handing me the mug. He'd bought the brand I liked, the one I'd drunk every night for years. I held the mug, inhaled the steam, thought about all the evenings I'd drunk it gratefully, thanked him for remembering I liked it, said goodnight, and been asleep within 40 minutes, deeply, unusually asleep. "Thank you," I said. I poured it down the bathroom sink while he was locking the back door. In the morning, I was supposed to be slow and unsteady. I'd practiced it with my sister. She'd watched me move around her living room and coached me slower pivot when you turn. One hand on surfaces, blink a little longer than normal. Not theatrical. Subtle enough that it just looked like someone who wasn't quite right and shouldn't be near cliff edges. After breakfast, my husband suggested the trail. "The sun's out," he said, looking through the back porch window at the gorge. "We might not get another clear morning like this." He turned to me with that easy smile. "Nothing too strenuous. Just to the first overlook and back." I held onto the porch railing as I went down the back steps. Carefully, deliberately. He watched me do it with an expression I had learned, finally, to read correctly. Not concern. Calculation. Confirming data points. The trail was narrow, bordered on the left by the sandstone cliff face and on the right by a rusted cable running between iron posts, the only barrier between the path and the gorge. In some sections, the cable was all there was. One post had a split at the base. It would give way under any real pressure. My husband walked slightly ahead. He kept looking back at me. "Checking my footing," he said. "Just making sure you're okay." I pressed my shirt once, activating the recorder. At the first overlook, we stood at the cable railing looking down into the gorge. The creek at the bottom was frozen at the edges. The drop was roughly 45 feet onto rock and ice. My heart was hammering so hard I was certain he could hear it. He stood beside me, his shoulder touching mine. He said, "I need you to know that I love you. I always have." 40 feet away, somewhere in the cedar trees to my left, Detective Reyes and 2 officers were motionless in the cold. "I know," I said. "What I'm about to do," he said, his voice very quiet. "It's not personal. I need you to understand that." I turned to look at him. I kept my face open, slightly confused, the way someone would look who hadn't spent 3 weeks preparing for this moment. "What do you mean?" He exhaled slowly. He looked down into the gorge and then back at me. "The life insurance," he said. $2.5 million. It clears tomorrow. I've been patient. I've been careful." He looked at me almost apologetically. "You've been a good wife, but I need a different life. Diane needs a stable home for her children. I can't give her that on a regional manager's salary." There it was, his voice on the recorder, flat and clear in the cold February air. I said, "Are you telling me you're going to hurt me?" He reached out and closed his hand around my forearm, gently, the way he'd held my hand in the car the day before. "I need it to look like the railing gave way," he said quietly, "like your balance gave out. You've had documented issues for months. It'll hold up." At the tree line behind us, I heard the snow crunch under boots. Franklin County Sheriff, freeze. My husband spun. His hand tightened on my arm for 1 second, one terrible second, and then released as the officers stepped onto the overlook with their weapons drawn. Detective Reyes was the last one out of the trees. She looked at me first. "You okay?" I nodded. I was shaking from cold and adrenaline and something I couldn't name yet, something that would take me a long time to identify as grief. My husband stood very still. He looked at the officers, and then at me, and then at the cable railing and the 45-foot drop in the frozen creek below, and I watched him understand all at once that every single thing had gone differently than he planned. "You were never dizzy," he said. His voice was strange, empty. "I've been flushing the vitamins for a month," I said. "And the tea." He didn't say anything else. He let them handcuff him without resistance, which was somehow worse than if he had fought. They charged him with attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and 2 counts related to the poisoning. The recording was clear. His statement on the overlook, captured in full, was unambiguous. Gerald's documentation of the offshore account established financial motive. My medical records, subpoenaed by Detective Reyes, showed elevated traces of a sedative compound that my doctor confirmed she had not prescribed. Diane, when law enforcement contacted her in Louisville, was devastated in a way I recognized because it was how I had felt sitting at my kitchen table with my son's tablet in my hands. She had known him for 4 years. She had believed they were building a life together. She had not known he was married. She had not known he had a son. She had not known about the insurance scheme or the cabin plan or the sedative in my vitamins. She cooperated fully with prosecutors and testified at trial. We were never able to be friends, she and I, but I don't hold anything against her. We were both deceived by the same careful, patient, methodical man. We just happened to land on different sides of what he needed from us. The trial took 11 months. His attorney argued that the recording had been improperly obtained, that my son, a minor, had recorded a private conversation without consent. The judge disagreed. His attorney argued that my presence at the cabin constituted entrapment. The judge disagreed. His attorney argued that his statement on the overlook was coerced by the presence of law enforcement, which is circular reasoning so absurd I still marvel someone said it in a courtroom. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. Guilty on all counts. 28 years. My son and I moved to Flagstaff that fall, far from Columbus and Hocking Hills and the life we'd built around someone who'd been building a different one all along. I changed back to my maiden name within the month. My son started at a new school in January, made friends by March, and never once asked to go back to Ohio. He saw a therapist for 3 years. She was a small woman with silver hair and a very direct way of asking questions, and she was the one who told me, about 6 months in, that my son was going to be okay. He has a strong attachment to you, she said. And he has something a lot of kids in his situation don't have. He knows his instincts were right. He trusted himself and it worked out. That's a foundation, not a wound. He's 32 now, as I said. When he was in law school, he told me he'd chosen victim advocacy specifically because of what happened, because he wanted to stand on the correct side of the kind of case he'd been part of. He handles mostly domestic cases, financial exploitation, coercive control. He is very good at it. His clients trust him immediately, which I think has something to do with the fact that he genuinely understands what it means to be in the room where the power is all on one side. He visits me here in Tucson twice a year. Last Thanksgiving, we sat on my back porch after dinner while his partner and my sister cleared the table inside, and he asked me something he'd never asked before. Were you ever actually scared? On the trail? I thought about it honestly, the way he deserved. Yes, I said, when he grabbed my arm. That 1 second, I was genuinely scared. He nodded slowly. He had a glass of iced tea sweating in his hand. He looked like his father around the jaw, which used to bother me more than it does now. I was scared every day for 3 weeks, he said. I kept thinking about what you said in the car, that we were going to be okay. I didn't know if you were just saying it. I wasn't just saying it, I said. I know. He smiled at the Arizona dark. I just wanted to hear you say that again. My parole notification came on a Tuesday morning, same as any other. I was on my second coffee, watching the mourning doves on the feeder my neighbor had put up. His name on the notification made the doves go blurry for a moment, then they came back into focus. I called my son. I called my sister. I called Detective Reyes, retired now and living in New Mexico, who said she'd expected the call and had already made a few of her own to make sure the protective order was properly documented in the right systems. Then I sat back on my porch and looked at the Rincon Mountains and thought about a 6-year-old boy in dinosaur pajamas, shaking, holding a tablet to his chest like it was something precious, walking into the kitchen to find his mother. He'd spent 3 weeks alone with knowledge that would have broken most adults. He'd figured out what an insurance policy was from a dictionary definition on a laptop. He'd created a password-protected folder and labeled it dinosaurs so no one would look twice. He'd carried the weight of it, quietly and carefully, until he found the right moment. When people hear the story, they always say, "What an extraordinary child," as if it's something unusual. As if children aren't paying attention all the time to everything, cataloging every inconsistency, noticing every wrong note, storing it away with a precision adults lose sometime around the age we decide we know how the world works. My son noticed his father had 2 phones before I did. He noticed that I always seemed sleepier on the nights his father brought me my vitamins. He noticed that the trip to the cabin was brought up 3 different times in 3 different ways, always with him assigned to someone else's care, always with just the 2 of us, alone, remote, a trail with a broken railing. I almost didn't sit down at the kitchen table that morning, almost said not right now. I will spend the rest of my life grateful that I did. If there's anything I want you to take away from this, if you're listening to this while you're driving somewhere, or making dinner, or trying to get through a hard evening, it's this. When a child tries to tell you something, stop, put down whatever's in your hands, sit down, look at them. Really look at them. At their eyes, at the way they're holding their body, at all the things they're communicating that have nothing to do with words. Children don't have the vocabulary for what they sometimes see. They don't have the framework, but they have something adults spend years trying to get back, which is the ability to register wrongness without talking themselves out of it. They haven't yet learned to explain away the feeling in their gut that says something is not right here. My son was right. He had been right for 3 weeks before I knew to listen. I nearly lost my life to my own willingness to believe the most comfortable version of reality. Trust your children. Trust the people who love you, who have no reason to lie. And if something feels wrong in the place that's supposed to feel safest, take that seriously. Leaving is hard. Asking for help is hard. Believing the worst of someone you chose is hard. It is not as hard as the alternative. I'm 63 years old. I wake up every morning in a house I own, in a city I chose, with a garden that gets good afternoon light and a son who calls me on Sundays. I have a sister who drove to my house within 20 minutes of one phone call without asking for any explanation at all. I have morning coffee and a feeder full of doves and the sound of the desert at dusk, which is one of the quieter sounds in the world. My husband got out of prison on a Tuesday. He lives somewhere in Indiana now. I got the notification because the law requires it. I noted the state, the county, and moved on with my morning. He is no longer the most important story in my life. He stopped being that the moment I sat down at a kitchen table and really looked at my son. That is the whole of it. That is everything. If you are in danger right now, please tell someone. Tell a sibling, a neighbor, a coworker, a detective. Tell anyone who will listen and act. You do not have to carry it alone. You do not have to figure it out by yourself. You are not obligated to protect the comfort of someone who is planning your destruction. And if your child comes to you this morning, or tonight, or tomorrow, holding something carefully, looking at you with eyes that are older than they should be, please stop. Sit down. Listen. They might be saving your life.